Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Professor John Vervaeke, who is a philosopher and cognitive scientist and returning guest to my show, also the author of many an article and the producer and writer of a phenomenal YouTube series that has the same title of his book, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Of course, you can find links to his work down there in the description. Without further ado, here is Professor John Vervaeke.
Hello.
How are you this day?
It's good to see you. It's been a while, Ben. We haven't talked in quite a while.
Has it been? It's probably been more than a year. Oh, maybe it's
Yeah.
even been a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah. You've been busy, I bet.
Yeah, very, very busy. Very busy.
Is are you almost done with your quarter slash semester for your teaching?
I am done my teaching and I officially go on my full year sabbatical as of January the 1st.
Oh, so you wrote a book while teaching and now you're going to do a sabbatical after the book's done? Is that you're just
Yeah,
trying
because
to be different?
I'm writing three more books and
Of
doing
course you
my next big video series, which is going to be the the largest project that I'm engaged in next year. Yeah.
are. Oh, wow. What's the title of this next series?
Walking the Philosophical Silk Road.
Okay. That's one of your buzzwords. Or did you coin that, the philosophical Silk Road?
Yes. Yeah.
Should we start walking that Silk Road now?
I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about, Ben. I didn't want to impose anything on what you wanted to talk about, but if we want to talk about that, I'm very happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm always flying by the seat of my pants, to tell you the truth. I was listening to some talks between you and Pajot and Vanderclay and Mr. Hall,
Of course, Jordan.
and you guys bring up a lot of things. I wanted to try to find a vector just for my personal advocation, but I don't know if you're interested in it at all. But there's a lot of discussions online that I'm kind of involved in about the political fallout of what people call liberalism.
Hmm.
And I know that you have some deep critiques without being like entirely critical of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment and liberalism are one and the same.
Yes.
So you are concerned with the sacred and the spiritual, or the experiential aspects of where we're at right now. But there's this whole question of authority and of power
Yes.
that in the political discussion is really it's just we keep on end up defeating the conversation. So I'm wondering if like there's some aspect of what you're working on that can bring enlightenment to the political situation, and how we're forming tribes or trying not to form tribes, or forming tribes about not forming tribes and stuff like that. That's kind of like the general.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. Yes, I just finished teaching a course at the university that I'm turning into a book called The Cognitive Science of Religion. Actually, the proper title is Reimagining Religion. And I started the course by saying to my students, I'm not going to tell you what religion is, or I'm not going to give you a definition, because we're in the grip of a picture that prevents us from looking at it in multiple ways. It really sort of locks us in. And this is the picture given to us by the Enlightenment. And so what I did was I said, what I'm going to do is very Wittgensteinian kind of project. I'm going to take apart that framework, deconstruct it, take apart all the disastrous dichotomies that were given to us by the Enlightenment, like fact, value is ought. And these are very relevant to the discussion of authority, by the way. Theory, data, religion, science. Uh,
Expertism. Yeah.
yes, all of these things, and then take apart these dichotomies that really blinkered us, and then try to get released from propositional tyranny, thinking that the only way we know is by asserting our beliefs. Take all that away, and then open up a possibility of looking deeply at your experience and any motivations, any growth arcs within that that might take you towards something more ultimate, more deeper, that you might be willing to consider calling the sacred or
Mm.
sacredness. And I think that is where I'm at right now, is to try and make possible a recovery of a viable, livable, and transformatively livable um, relationship with sacredness. And I think that has a lot to do with what we're thrashing around with authority. Because basically, I guess the argument I would sort of, well, before I give the argument, I'll give a provocative thesis,
I'm here for it.
which is, I think, and I have to say this while also first caveating it by saying I'm a deep, deep critic of theocracy, but I think authority ultimately grounds in the sacred. I think without a an agreement of how people are living a relationship to the sacred, it is hard to find a way in which we can articulate what it is to have legitimate authority. Um, and the things that we've used in the past, the things given to us by the Enlightenment, for example, that what legitimates authority is a mandate from the electorate or something like that,
Yeah.
has fallen apart right in front of our eyes. And what we're seeing instead is something analogous to the Protestant Reformation. We're seeing the fragmentation, the deep cultural fragmentation of the electorate, of the political body, the loss of a collective sense of the sacred. So the American dream has largely been abandoned,
Mm.
and Americanism has largely been abandoned for the United States, with a lot of its attendant mythos of manifest destiny and things like that, final frontiers, etc. And
Or
so,
even the so-called post-war consensus of America being the savior of the West from fascism.
yes, yes, yes. And then for a long time, the savior of the West from imperial communism.
Yes.
Right. And so we had these large meta narratives that made things properly sacred, and that were things to which people could defer to across their own particular egocentric or tribal interests. Well, no matter what we're doing, we all agree that we have to resist communism. No matter what we're doing, we all agree that we have to topple the Nazis and the fascists, right? And no matter what we do, we all agree that democracy is a good thing, etc. And a lot of these things were running off of a background of a Christian interpretation of what renders things sacred.
Mm.
For example, you have, well, what that most people don't realize that the greatest period of church attendance in the United States was in the 50s and the 60s, because, right, the one way in which we were able to sanctify the West was to describe the Russians as godless,
Okay.
the godless Russians, and we are the people who are the children of God, and that sanctifies us. It makes us sacred. It makes what we're doing sacred, and and the popular literature picks up on that and reverberates with it. All of that is basically gone, which I think is just part of the ongoing erosion
Hmm.
of the meaning crisis. And so, I think what we're scratching around for is, well, what do we base authority on? And we're running up against the problem, and this problem has been thought about by some very deep minds. Hegel, this is the core of Hegel's work, is like what legitimates authority. And one more thing, Ben, and then I'll shut up so you can talk, is, and this is one of the things that Hegel was very important for, is he made it very clear that there's connections between authority, normativity. Normativity is your judgments as to what is good, what is true, what is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and our very capacity to make things meaningful and intelligible. All three of those are deeply interwoven with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's right in the word authority is authorship, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
This might be a curveball, but have you seen the old 1980s Top Gun and then the recenter one that came out a couple years ago?
I've seen neither. It's just one of those weird things about me. I'm not a
Yeah.
big Tom Cruise fan,
Yeah.
because I don't like sort of some of what seem to be legitimate accounts of his personal life that sort of irk me a little bit. But
Yeah.
no deep reason. That's the superficial reason.
I bring it up because in the 1980s version, he's fighting the communists, and the communists are depicted as these bug-like creatures.
Yeah.
They have these masks on, and the music's very powerful. It's very emotive. It's a very American heroism-centric thing. But the Tom Cruise character has like this American, which is part of the American myth, maybe. He has a really big problem with authority, right? He's always
Yeah.
breaking the rules, you know.
Yeah.
He's Maverick. He's literally the Maverick, and he gets the girl at the end. And then the new one came out in a period of Hollywood that was really deconstructing and pardon the phrase, shitting all over all the myths and
Yeah. Yes.
everything.
Yes.
And it goes back to this Tom Cruise character who's still a maverick. He's still anti-authority, but he's kind of put in charge, and he has to be the teacher. And there's these really interesting inversions. Instead of a bad guy being localized with the USSR or whatever, it's kind of this impossible, it's somewhere in the Middle East, but this impossible technological problem that
Yeah.
that takes total bravado to solve. You know, you really have to put yourself on the line to do that. And there's this really interesting inversion where Tom Cruise, he's courting this woman who's his age, who's a mother, and they kind of have to sneak around behind her daughter's back. This really weird kind of Gen X. We're not the authority figures. We're still sneaking around, and we used to sneak around behind our parents, you know, with Footloose generation. Now we're sneaking around behind our kids, you know,
Wow.
kind of thing. But I don't know where, without you seeing that, I was trying to bring up like this American mythology. Like we don't have like this grand enemy, but we still have these problems to solve. And there's kind of like this enemy within, this anti-authoritarian streak.
Yeah. I mean, and that's been part of the American mythos, right? You had the two foundations, the religious foundations with the Puritans, and they were leaving a kind of authority structure that was taking shape in the Church of England and things like that. And then you also have, the Revolution, which sees itself as an attack on a certain kind of authority. But what's happening in both also is another kind of authority is being offered as so instead of the church, God. That's the Puritans, right? And instead of the empire, right? What you've got is the proposal of the people as some sort of holder of sacredness. Now, obviously, the Americans are fraught. That's fraught because who they designated as a person or not was going to be something they're going to fight and often bloodily about. But what you
Hmm.
have, though, is you keep what you saw in previous instances is yes, authority will be questioned, but what happens is it shifts. And when it shifts with a corresponding shift in what's taken to be sacred. What is it that we all should defer to? What is it we should hold in common unity, in community together? And that is no
Hmm.
longer the case.
Hmm.
And you see, I mean, the past American election is actually, regardless of the fact that Trump won, which I think has important um, um, there's important aspects, historical aspects about that. But um, what was really interesting when I was talking to Americans was how afraid they were about their election. Like, right, this used to be the election used to be this civic celebration, the religious celebration of democracy, and it was this thing that we loved and we participated and get out and vote and all of this stuff, right? And if you didn't vote, like, wow, you're not a good citizen. And there was this religious
Hmm.
fervor around American elections. And then would always the winner would have the fireworks, and it's like it's a religious event, but instead people were terrified about the election because they were afraid of the religious civil war that's ripping up America apart actually turning into a hot war, a hot
Yeah.
civil war.
Yeah. From your perspective on the mountaintop of Canada, you know, the bird's eye view
Hardly.
of America, what Is there different things that different groups, overlapping groups, are holding sacred? Is there actually a battle for the sacred, or is that how the lines are being drawn? And what is it that you perceive us as holding sacred?
Well, what that's a long question, and I mean, and this is part of sort of work I'm doing now about I'm unhappy. Previously, I just sort of relied upon the psychological construct of meaning in life, but I've become progressively unhappy with it as a
Hmm.
psychological construct. Um, but
The meaning of life, is that what you said?
meaning in life is a psychological construct. I think it has value, but what I think it's tracking isn't what many of us are talking about when we're talking about the meaning crisis.
Okay.
And so I think what's at work in the meaning crisis is the uh, something like three different responses. One is that people just are bereft. They get overtaken by burnout. They get overtaken by bullshit. They get overtaken by loneliness, and they sort of collapse. And of course, COVID showed that is a very powerful propensity that could happen to individuals. Once sort of the routine, see, routine acts as a buttress against meaninglessness for us, and when it falls away, we are often don't have the kind of resiliency we need. So you see that, and then you saw the displacement. We see that we've seen the continual attempts to find something sacred that will be the community of cultural consensus.
Hmm.
And so we try things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe to be our sacred place. And you
Yeah.
know it's sacred because of the attitude people have when that universe got overtaken by political ideology. They didn't just quietly stop watching, they got enraged. They got enraged and they made videos and they went on a rampage. And people, Critical Drinker built, entire YouTube careers around picking up on that people were sort of they were sort of righteously angry. It was very much a religious response. How dare you do this to this world?
Hmm.
And so you see that kind of thing. And then, of course, part of that displacement has been onto the political arena. But then you also have a positive replacement in which you see things like the mindfulness revolution, the revival of Stoicism, the interest in Buddhism, the psychedelic renaissance, in which
Hmm.
there's also an attempt to get back at a renewed sense. So I want to make it nuanced. I agree with you that there's a struggle over what the sacred is, but it's not simply, sides pitted against each other. There's different people are coming at this from three different vectors. One is there are people who are desperate. Then there are people who, if you ask them, are their lives meaningful? Their lives are, oh yes, my life is very meaningful. And then they belong to some crazy thing, right? And then there's other people whose their meaning in life is tied towards the cultivation of wisdom and virtue and an orientation towards this thing that I've been talking about, the advent of the sacred, the idea that it seems like what's happening is what sacredness is going through a massive like advent. It's being reborn in a way we don't yet completely understand.
Hmm.
So there's also the dimension of people who are forward looking about the sacred and people who are like who are protective and conservative about the sacred.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Ben, that's a more complicated picture then, but it's like
No.
that. There's multiple vectors. So there's multiple zones of conflict and dispute, and also weird alliances form that are outside of our the script we've been going with for the last 40 years.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, that's what makes it so dynamic and captivating, at least on with all the personalities involved, and then
Yeah.
lining up over one thing, and then breaking apart the next day, and then relining, and all this constant realignment. There was something provocative you said to Paul Vanderklay when you spoke with him and Jonathan Peugeot, and I think the title of that episode was "The Advent of the Sacred." Actually, you said that the world is responding to the meaning crisis, and
Yes.
it was almost kind of like this dangerous phrase. It was like kind of you're anthropomorphizing, like the
Yeah.
world does care, like this thing called the world. Would you open that up a little bit? Like, how does the world
Yeah.
respond to us little ants on our little hill?
I mean, so there's a bit of influence. from Hegel with his notions of the zeitgeist and the Weltgeist.
Hmm.
This zeitgeist is the spirit of the times, and we're well aware of that spirit, and we're
Mm.
aware of what it means to call it a spirit. It's a dynamic that's at work at the level of collective intelligence, of distributed cognition, and and individuals are varying in how they interface that, the degree to which they participate in it, internalize it, the degree to which they resist it. But so you know what I mean by the spirit of the times. And then Hegel had this idea that there's also the Weltgeist. There's a deeper thing that's at work, and it's at work in sort of I'm gonna really try, Ben, to not use any technical Hegelian language or
Oh,
anything like.
you can pepper it. You can pepper
Well,
it
let's
in.
just try it this way: that the what's happening is in sort of the guts of the machinery of how we make sense of reality, which is also the way in which, and these are not separable, the way in which we make sense of reality and the way reality becomes sensible to us. So there's a world side and there's a us side to that. I talk about the agent arena coupling.
They're
So
fitted into each other. Did the world create us out of necessity? I'm sorry to get a little weird here, but I mean,
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, I don't think teleological necessity, but I think there has been a causal pathway that has produced us. But
yeah.
I don't. So you have to be really careful about this language. I don't think the agency, the collective agency of these distributed systems is self-reflective or self-conscious in any way. So I think it is more the way an ecology works, where an ecology is this dynamical system that in which all the living organisms participate, and it checks and balances them and continually adjusts and fits them individually and collectively to a changing environment. And so that's what I mean in that sense. We have something like that, but at a cultural level, going on, and so the two are, like you said, they're fitted, and I think at the very guts of how we're making sense of the world and how the world is sensible to us is going through a change. And so I would not call it a merely psychological thing. So when I'm talking about the the spirit of the world, I'm talking about this thing between us and reality that has been dynamically evolving since we started having this thing called culture.
Hmm.
And it has an evolutionary life of its own. It works out some contradictions and problems and issues within its own functioning. The way an ecology adapts and adjusts and reorganizes. So I'm not attributing any self-consciousness or self-reflection or self-direction. I'm thinking of it very much as something alive, um, and capable of solving tremendously complex problems, because that's what these things do. But I think of it more as, like I say, like the analogy is the ecology. So I think
And
the what's
it's something what you're describing is something really big, like the vowel shift in the Middle Ages, right?
of course,
Or
and
like
that's a great analogy. Who does that, right? And who ran the Renaissance, right? These questions. Who ran the Axel Revolution? These things don't. That's the wrong question. Obviously, individual human actors played a role, but they're
yeah,
not the authors. And this is the point. Where's the authority?
yeah.
Right? In the Axial Revolution, where's the authority in the
Mm.
Renaissance? Where's the authority for these shifts in the Weltgeist? Because there is no author we can point to, but nevertheless, all of these is driven by a new sense of the true, the good, and the beautiful, a new authority for how we should show up and how we should relate to each other. And that isn't that those moments are just the peaks of a process. And
Okay.
this is right, that has been ongoing and continues. And so this is what I mean by the advent of the sacred.
Okay. So can you describe something either just like as a flavor or some sort of phenomenological description of what you're seeing or sensing is
Yes.
occurring now, and like what kind of shape it's taking, what kind of shift is
So
occurring?
so one thing is the weird, and I'm trying to use that in a somewhat positive sense. The weird and wonderful way in which things are coalescing. So that you have people in biology and
Okay.
people in theology talking meaningfully to each other, not just being polite and academically tolerant because we both belong to the same university, or
Yeah.
that kind of usual institutional promotion. But no, no, no. We should be listening to each other in this mutually transformative. And more people, Ben, are actually saying that to me. They're saying, wow, something's happening. Things are converging and people are talking and ways of thinking are emerging that I wouldn't have predicted 5 years ago. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. The other thing is there's this shift, right? And and it's weird, again, because sometimes I'm talking about things that are conceptually, philosophically very challenging. Um, but there's this shift towards the idea of what is going to be the crucial feature of the sacred, sort of its
Hmm.
primary marker. And so, what's been the case up until now has been a very static model. So I'm usually a Platonist, but here's where I criticize Plato. The idea of the sacred as the perfect, the finished, the complete,
The
the static.
smooth, you said.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Very much. And now the what's being emphasized about the sacred is its inexhaustible creativity,
Yeah.
its dynamic, the a dynamic ability to exceed our expectations, to surprise us, to reorient us, to carry us further into each other and into reality. And so I've been seeing that shift, and it's at multiple levels. I see it at like the level of very high academic work, and I also see it right in people the way like when people are showing up in some of the courses they teach online and the way they're the sort of orientation, the disposition they're bringing towards the topic of God. They
Hmm.
don't want to talk about perfection. They want to talk about this. They want to talk about a sense of the sacred that would make sense of weird and wonderful experiences they've had, or the
Okay.
way the world is constantly seems to be shifting. They want something that keeps pace in that
Okay.
profound way.
You brought up how there is kind of new lines of communication between these different departments just within
Yeah.
the academy. That brings up the question: why were they not talking in the first place? What caused them to silo themselves? And
Yeah.
if you can describe that, then you can describe something about the positive shift towards communicating.
Yeah. So, I mean, so what drives that? And this goes again towards a reappropriation of the sacred. And what drove that is what Kant exemplified. John Locke and Immanuel Kant are the exemplary figures of the Enlightenment.
Okay.
Kant wrote the famous essay, What is Enlightenment? I mean, he literally did that. And then Kant represents the shift, right, of the professional philosopher into the university setting. So
Away
what's
from
happened?
where he was just hanging out in
Patronage.
baths. Oh,
No, patronage. So you were the patron. Like Descartes is the patron of certain
he taught
wealthy.
the sons, and
Yeah,
while he
yeah,
did
yeah,
that, he did his treatises.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
so what you've got is this shift, and what's happening is you get a move that's made by Kant that immediately starts to ramify into science. So Kant, and this is something Habermas has done a lot of great work on. Kant, the epitome of the Enlightenment is the idea of autonomy, the autonomous individual. I'm self-governing, I'm self-regulating. The only legitimate reason for my ever acting is my choice, my desire, right? The autonomous individual. And then Kant struggles with reason around that. But this notion of autonomy and also interacting with other things I've talked about before, propositional theory and other things, it led him to separate the three transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Okay.
So that the knowledge project, the art project, and the ethical project become autonomous from each other. They stop talking to each other
Huh.
as having anything fundamentally to do with each other. And so what happens is the arts and the sciences break off, and then within philosophy, the ethical sides and the metaphysical sides break off. And what happens is this ramifies through the institution of the university, in which we get departments that are dedicated. We're just talking about this. And then what you have also is you get departmental uh, envy and departmental fear.
Yeah, because
So
there's animals, human animals in these little departments.
yeah, so you get psychology's ongoing fear. It was born out of this philosophy. So it has an ongoing fear of whatever we are, we're not philosophy, and philosophy trying to desperately say we get that we're not science, but we're not physics, but we're still valuable somehow. And
Hmm.
you get all of this almost like the narcissism of small
Th-
differences.
this erosion of confidence, ultimately.
It's an erosion of confidence, but that
And the
it
scrambling
also
for authority.
yes, and it's also a powerful gain because the specialization allows us to get a terrific increase in expertise that allows people to go really, really deeply. So what we do is we sacrifice a certain amount of breadth. The university was originally about making somebody universal,
Yeah.
right? Hence the name. And then what we got instead is, right, we're going to give up on breadth and we're going to go for depth. And we're going to hope somehow that this increasingly cacophonous set of highly autonomous voices and departments are somehow going to make sense. And we do this around that project. Somehow it's going to work. And it was largely held together by a background adherence to a Christian framework and a Christian sense of the sacred. But that, of course, was has been completely undermined.
How was that? Could you just explain that a little bit? What was the background? Because it's also a work ethic and a kind of a set of standards, which I guess would derive from
So,
values, right?
so the university was actually interwoven with three other centers of authority and the normative. And so the university was the knowledge, but it was bound up with the monastery, which was the wisdom institution,
Okay.
which was bound up with the church, which was the interface. How do you interface knowledge and wisdom with people's lives,
Okay.
right? And they were tightly bound together. And then the state was off in the background, right? Sort of managing those aspects of the world that were not under the direct purview of those three. But what happens is the monasteries get largely shut down because of the Protestant Reformation.
Hmm.
The university swings free from the church. For
Yeah.
example, I teach at University College. It was originally founded by a Christian denomination, but it eventually brings free. And then what it does is the university attaches itself to the state, and you get the state-funded university,
Yeah.
and there we are.
Yeah. And so just to arc back to that question, so if you're describing like the Kantian framework, shooting into specialization with tons of gains, like what is causing people to come back? Like what is you can describe the disintegration. What's this reintegration
Yeah.
movement?
Okay. So,
And are you
um,
the Kant of our times?
no.
Okay.
I what I would say is that I think cognitive science, which especially the version that I learned from people like Evan Thompson and Sean Gallagher and Herbert Dreyfus, um, I think it is part of the the integration engine that's happening right now. Because look,
Mm.
so there's an epistemological thing that's going on, and then we can also talk about something beyond that. But the epistemological one, I've got to see from the inside because I'm a cognitive scientist. So uh, what you have in the university all these disciplines talking about the mind. Now, this is not a neutral topic like ant reproduction. This is a topic that people identify with. People
Mm.
bind their identity to their mind, and how they understand their mind is a crucial part of how they understand their identity. Now, most people don't have sort of a reflective understanding. They absorb it culturally by a kind of osmosis. But where do they absorb it from? Well, they absorb it from the institutions that are putting out the discourse about what minds are. Now, look at what the university has. It has neuroscientists saying that minds are brains, and they do fMRIs and they talk about, the default mode network or something like that.
Pathways and
Yeah, pathway.
electrodes. Yeah.
Then you have the AI people saying, no, that's not what we mean. We mean, right, what artificial intelligence is about. We mean learning algorithms, and we're going to make simulations like ChatGPT. That's how we get at what the mind is. And then you have psychologists going, no, no, no. The mind is about experience and behavior. And what we're going to do is we're going to run experiments on people and do statistical analysis. And the linguist says, what are you talking about? Human minds are bound to language. We have to study language. We have to look for deep structure and transformational structures. And the anthropologists say, what are you talking talking about? A mind is an inherently cultural thing, and we have to talk about, right? And so what it's like there's all these countries and they all speak a different language. Now here's the problem. What that does is that means the term mind is profoundly equivocal in our
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
It
Just like
doesn't
that
have a,
term meaning that you brought up earlier.
yes, exactly. It's equivocal, and that fragments us, and that fragments us at the level of our identity. We don't know what we're actually talking about when we talk about our minds, right, even though they are so, quintessential to our sense of identity. And then the issue is that is also bound up with, it's highly unlikely that each of these levels of reality, the brain level, the information processing level, the behavioral experiential level, that they're not causally interacting with each other or affecting each other. That's really improbable. It's actually highly probable that they're all flowing into each other and causally interacting and constraining each other. So what we need in order to study that up and down, we need something that gets the disciplines to talk to each other. We need a shared language and a shared way of talking to each other, not where one comes in and says, "You're going to all speak my way."
Yeah.
That's reductionism. But we're all going to do reciprocal reconstruction. We're all going to mutually transform each other. And you use philosophy. Philosophy gets a new role now
Oh,
because philosophy is good at building those kinds of new forms of discourse that bridge between specialities. And when you do that, you now have cognitive science. So what I've seen, and this is just going out and out like this, is and social media has afforded this, is that people, specialists are realizing, no, no, we have to cut across all these disciplinary departmental divisions if we're going to get at reality. So
okay.
there's that epistemological engine is driving it.
Yeah.
There's I also think there's cultural issues driving it too.
Oh, could you mention those and the
So
cultural?
the I think the cultural issues driving it is people have a background sense. You have to be really careful about this because you have to be very careful about what you're talking about, what's motivating people as opposed to what they believe is motivating them. And that can sound patronizing, and it's not meant to be. I'm equally guilty of that too. So I'm not, I don't, I'm not wearing some special armor. Um, so people have a sense of increasing polarization and fragmentation. They have a sense that we need somehow to find a way to talk to each other that is not the discourse of manipulation or the discourse of debunking or defeating or destroying all the things that get bolded in yellow and red on social media. They like, so one of the things I get overwhelmingly is people telling this to me, and then saying one of the things they value is that I try to build bridges rather than attack enemies. And that's been that. So I've seen this as an increasing countercultural movement, and I see it cutting across all kinds of things that normally radically divide us. I find people on the left and the right saying this. I find people, the libertarian versus right, the collectivity people. Everybody in all, right, well, that's too strong. But a lot of people from all
Hmm.
of these different domains are regularly saying to me, like, we've got to get past this because they have, I think, the correct intuition that debate can't get us to the normative consensus we're hungry for. It
Okay.
can't get us that. We need something, a different kind of discourse.
Consensus, that again, that just sounds like it's really difficult. I'm in exploring the criticisms of liberalism,
Yes.
and its foundation, those principles, like one is like the equality of man. And
Yeah.
you look at it, you're like, well, actually, people aren't created equal. Insofar as they are created, they're like, there's wild variation, and that's richness,
Yes.
right? But then you're like, well, how do we instantiate that in a politics? That is like the biggest no-no. We're never supposed to instantiate difference into politics. Actually, we are supposed to instantiate the end of difference in politics, which heightens the difference like on the back end
Yeah.
with affirmative action and stuff like that. But just like deeply embedded in me is this inability to not see people as equal. Even though like I can see stats and I can see different cultural things, like there's something that just really triggers me. Like, it's really important to preserve that.
So what we had, what we had, and this goes towards the kind of consensus we're talking about. I think the attempt to impose an ideological consensus is a displaced attempt to deal with this anxious anxiety about we're too fragmented, we're too polarized.
Yeah.
Right. And you get this weird sort of performative contradiction. We're going to talk the language, right, of diversity while we make everybody conform,
Yeah.
which is very problematic. But see, what we used to have, right, is we used to have a consensus that was basically given to us around, well, we're all equal in the sense we're all the children of God.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah. There's a
isn't
transcendence equality.
Yes, we are all equal in our relationality to the sacred, not in our relations to each other, right? And when you lose the sacred, you then turn the arrow goes from we're all equal this way to
Yeah.
we're all equal this way. And then the facts that you've mentioned stare us in the face, which is that's clearly not true, right? And so then what we try to do is we try to recover it and say, well, we're all morally equal. But the problem with that is that morality is tied to rationality and agency, and people are not always equal in their rational agency. And
Yeah.
I'm trying not to take any political stance here. I'm trying to talk about the
Yeah.
guts of the machinery are not working. You see, we used to have a triangulation notion of equality. We are all children of God. We are all equal before God. Right? Our differences are only in service of us all coming into a common unity with that which transcends us all infinitely, and that therefore demands from all of us self-correction and the realization that each one of us is flawed and we need each other, and we have to be very careful how we judge each other and identify each other.
Yeah.
Now, religions have also screwed that up. I'm not trying to paint them
Yeah.
as. But here's what I want to say, Ben, and then I'll shut up. Like,
Stop saying that. You're here to not shut up, John.
okay, but what I am challenging is this ridiculous discourse in which we compare the worst of religion to the best of science. No, you should compare the best of religion to the best of science, and the worst of science to the worst of religion. These unequal, these what I call diagonal comparisons, are illegitimate as far as I can tell. So,
Well, yeah, and that translates to political discourse too. Like, we should be comparing the best of liberalism with the best of the alternatives to liberalism, and then the worst of liberalism to the worst of the.
exactly. You have to get a fuller discourse, and the only reason you would do that, and notice this ties what is if we are both committed to something that transcends us. If we both have the idea, right, that the dialogos, the way of the logos, is something that transcends us, and it's based on some very, very powerful psychological and cognitive facts, which is it's very hard for me to see my own biases. It's very hard for me to take on interest outside my egocentric preferences. You're a great source for me for seeing my bias and seeing interests that I don't currently have that I should consider taking on. And then I trust you in that. You trust me in that. We don't trust that you're going to adopt my view or that I'm going to adopt your view.
Yeah.
We entrust ourselves to a process of reciprocal correction and reconstruction so that you can become better as you are and I can become better as I am. And we feel bound to something that transcends us, that we are accountable to. That is gone. That is gone. The idea that the political process, that democracy is a process of distributed dialogical rationality to which we all owe allegiance because it transcends our individual flaws, is gone. And now it has been replaced by, right, an adversarial, I have to destroy the other because they're evil. It's a zero-sum game. And when you're in that, you're in game theoretic prisoner dilemma, and you will tit for tat down to the lowest common denominator, inevitably. So for me, it doesn't matter who wins these elections. I mean, it matters short-term, but it doesn't matter long-term culturally, because as long as that grammar is held in place, it's going to continue to get worse.
Damn. So how do you... I know that you're avoiding the metaphor of engineering, but how do you re-engineer religion? I mean, that's one of your big projects, and that is a big question. So even before that, and this is your, I guess this was your course, like you go back, so what is it? Like, what are we even aiming at? And and what part of me does that aiming?
So, well, let's answer the orientation question first, and then I'm going to come back to the engineering question because I think that answering the orientation helps me engage in some serious self-correction. And I I aspire to be at least a faint copy of Socrates. Um, so, what are we orienting towards? We're orienting towards something that has become very eclipsed for us, which is we need to be in touch with what's real. We need to be in touch with what's real. And then people don't understand that real is a comparative. So real isn't like red, real is like tall, right? Something is more real in comparison to something that's less real. The stick is more real than the shadow. The shadow, we use shadows as a metaphor for things that aren't ultimately real. Now, nobody means that there isn't a phenomenon, the shadow. What do they mean? They mean, well, look, I can explain the shadow from the stick, but I can't explain the stick from the shadow. So this sense making really matters. And what do people want? Do they want shadows or real things in their life? Well, they want real things, right? Now you keep pushing on this, and you keep asking, okay, well, where does this head? And right, there's always
So
been
just to drill into that, like if you can't explain you can explain the shadow from the stick, but what's realer than the stick? Would it be the tree? Like, where do you go from there?
well, let's do it this way. And this connects to meaning in life in ways that aren't properly tracked by the current construct. So, one of the things people say, and there's the idea that we've operationalized it in the construct of meaning in life is, but they haven't. They'll say, "Well, I want to be connected to something larger than myself." They obviously don't mean that literally. Like if you chain them to a mountain, they're like, "Oh, wow." Right? So what do they mean? Well, you have to work on it, and
Yeah.
this is what I think is meaning from. Think about it this way, which what is missing from the meaning and construct, the meaning and life construct right now. When you're in a dream, you're in this little world, right? And in that world, it seems real to you. But when you wake up, when the lights come on, when you're enlightened, listen to the language. You're in a bigger world, and that bigger world is such that it's like when you have an insight and you realize the limitations and the biases of the smaller perspective. You do sort of with your perspective taking what you and I can do dialogically. You get this bigger perspective that allows you to retrospectively say that was less real. Now you ask people, do you want to live in the shallow, small, artificial world, or do you want to live in the big, real world?
Yeah.
Now, for a very, very long time, and usually when you press people, they want to be connected to what's real, what's really real. People will reliably say they want to know if their partner's cheating on them, even if that means the utter destruction of their romantic relationship, right? And when you ask them why, they'll say, well, because it wasn't real, and I need my relationship to be real. When people have psychedelic experiences or mystical experience, they encounter what they call the really real. It's just really real, and they love it just for that, just because it's
Yeah.
real, and they
Yeah.
change their lives to come into contact with it. See, so what we have a need, we have a profound need, and it goes into our sense of meaning, not semantic meaning, but this what makes life worth living is we want to be connected to what is real, what is real. And what's happened is people have abandoned that project in a large scope, by and large.
Do you think that what attracts us to that experience of the really real is that sense of expansion, not necessarily the really real? Is there like kind of a dragon that you start chasing, and maybe even in a positive sense where you continually
I
try to?
Yeah, I think, and this is where I mean, this is one of the proclivities that drives us into insanity, is
Yeah.
we can confuse the criterion with the goal. So people get hung up. They say, well, the reason I'm doing everything is for pleasure. No, you have pleasure because you've satisfied the goal of not dehydrating by drinking some water, right? You're confusing a criterion that's
Oh.
telling you you're achieving the goal that is actually what is valuable to you with the thing that you value. And then we get locked into that and we fall prey to bullshit in the technical sense because what we can do is we can incentivize these salient or a criterion, while actually disconnecting people from pursuing the goal, right?
Okay.
So, like we have criterion of having deep relationships, which is the number of people we know and the number of people we can name. That's a criterion of the goal. But we can get now co-opted into just collecting names of people we know through social connections, but that doesn't mark. It doesn't actually indicate that we've developed deep relationships. In fact, the number of genuine friendships that people have is reliably declining decade by decade.
So in so how does that lead us towards conceptualizing what religion, I guess, used to do or can do now in this environment?
So, what I think religion can do for us is it can uh, take us through the the kind of, and I do want to get back to the engineering question. That's what's, but I'll come to it. Let me do this first. Look, this coming into relationship to what is ultimately real is it challenges another enlightenment maxim. See, the enlightenment rejected a proposal that had been on the table since the Actual Revolution, which was that the deeper aspects of reality, our attempts to get to what is more real, require fundamental transformations in us. We have to wake up. We have to grow up. We have to mature. We have to become wiser. We have to self transcend. This is running like all the way through until you get the Cartesian revolution and you get the proposal we don't need to do that anymore. What we have is we have a method, a computational method that will allow us to discover all the truths that are possible. Leibniz, who was a follower of Descartes, famously said, we're going to have a universal calculus, and there'll be no more disagreements. We will just calculate all the answers, and we'll get all the truths." And
And
so,
then what? Then shoot ourselves in the head because there's no purpose
well,
anymore?
yeah, I mean, no, the idea was what we'll do is we will come up with a secular version of the promised land, and we will work with this universal
Yes.
computational calculus towards
Yep.
utopias
Yep.
that will bring us the
Yep.
salvation we long for and take us into being what we really should be. Listen to the language, right? And we talk about self-realization and
Yeah.
take us into the way we really were meant to be and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can see the hunger for realness driving the utopic vision,
Yeah.
right?
What, and so they created a technocracy or a policy-laden apparatus that then becomes a network that divorces us from the real.
Well, it does and it doesn't. And but what it does is it does what it promises to do, and that's why it has had its longevity. I mean, it promises to give us access to all those aspects of reality that can be accessed through, a some kind of computational, inferential, experimental, mechanical manipulation of the world.
Okay.
And that has been vast, and it has terrifically empowered us. Uh,
Okay.
and and that has added to the way in which it has masked the fact that it has removed from us the the remembrance, the recognition that there are a lot of things that you can't know unless you go through a transformative experience. And here's the thing about transformative experiences. You can't go through them computationally. So this is the amazing work of L.A. Paul and Agnes Callard, right? And I'm getting to what religion does. This is actually all germane to that question, which is so L.A. Paul gives the famous thought experiments, famous now. She says, your friends come up to you and they give you undeniable evidence that they can turn you into a vampire. Should you do it? And then the thing that she points out, and I use some of my language, and I've used this language in Lori's presence, and so she's happy with it,
Okay.
is, right? Well, you probably have all kinds of propositional knowledge about vampires. You can state a lot of facts about them, and you might have some procedural skills. You might lurk really well or something like that, but you don't know what it's like to be a vampire until you become one. You don't know what that consciousness and that
Yeah.
way of sizing up reality. You don't know what it's like, right? You don't have that perspectival knowing. You're ignorant. And you don't know who you're going to be. You don't know how your identity is going to fundamentally change. So the participatory knowing is absent. So you have perspectival and participatory ignorance. and it's completely symmetrical, right? Which means you don't know if you should do it, you don't know what you're going to lose, and you don't know what you're going to miss if you don't do it, right? And so you're caught. Now, the way you're supposed to make decisions in the Cartesian framework is you're supposed to lay out the probabilities and then assign a utility to them and then calculate which gives you the overall greatest positive gain against the measurable risk. You can't do that with any of this
Okay.
because you don't know. You're fundamentally ignorant. There's radical uncertainty. Now, here's the thing. Who cares about vampires? Her point is that Godonkin experiments are to get you to see something and then get you to turn that gaze somewhere else. You face this when you're facing any of your biggest decisions, like having a child. You don't know what it's like to have a child until you can read all the propositions. I've had 2 kids. You can read
Yeah.
all the propositions you want. You might have a few skills of caretaking, but you don't know what it's going to be like. And you don't know who you're going to be because you're going to change. You're going to radically change, and you're going to see the world. Your consciousness is going to be transformed. You're going to go from, if you try to be a good parent, and I'm not claiming I'm a great parent or anything. I've tried my best. I think I can say that. But you're going to go through a radical reorientation from being primarily egocentric to being other-centric in a way that no drug will do for you, man. It is incredible. Here's another one. Leave where you are and go to another country and take up a new career. Here's another one. Enter into a long-term committed romantic relationship with someone. You don't know what. So what do? These are the big decisions. They put us through transformation. So now this is my own work. What I notice people doing is if they're going to have a child, is they get a dog. If they're considering having a child, they get a
Hmm.
dog. And the dog is in this liminal place. The dog gives them a taste of what it will be like and a taste of who they'll become, but they're not fully committed and they can play and they can toggle back and forth between who they are and who they're going to be. And right, they're not fully completely committed because if it doesn't work, they can give the dog away in a way you can't just give away a kid,
Hmm.
right? And so this is what is called serious play. You enter into this liminal space in which you imaginally augment something. You
Hmm.
use your imagination not to picture something in your mind, but
Hmm.
to look through it differently at the world, right? You do this serious play. You imaginally augment the dog. I'm going to play as if this is a child, right? And I'm using serious play like the way we seriously play music or the way I play Tai Chi,
Okay.
right? It's
Can you do
not
that
frivolous.
with a religion? Can you seriously play as a Christian?
That's what religion primarily is, I'm arguing.
Oh.
That
Oh.
religion is practices called rituals that
Yeah.
engage not primarily our propositional knowing, but engage our perspectival and participatory knowing in ways that allow us to go through transformative experiences in ways that transfer broadly to many different domains of our life and transform our consciousness and our cognition at multiple levels. Let me give you an example. Okay, so fire walking, people walk on fire cross culturally, cross historically. They walk across hot beds of coals. Sounds like an insane thing to do. And from an enlightenment perspective, it's like this is bizarre superstition. Because what's the theory here? Because no matter who you ask, like you talk to this people here, and they'll tell you blah 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 story, and you go over here and a totally different story about why they're walking on the coals, right? Okay, what's going on here? Well, think about it. Okay, so when you're walking on coals, the issue about them is it's actually a relatively slow heat conductor, the embers, right? So the trick is you got to walk, right, not too slow because then you'll get burned, but not too fast because if you walk too fast, you'll kick them up and then they'll flame and burn you. So you got to get just the right timing. And what you have to do is you have to enter into a state of profound, right, mindfulness, almost a flow state. Now
Yeah.
think about this. You're practicing getting into a state of really powerful connectedness and flow in which you're trying to work at the timing of how you're engaging in a situation. Do you think that skill could transfer to many different domains of your life very powerfully?
Yeah.
You bet. You bet. This is perspectively, right, really, really powerful. And it is transforming you. It's giving you a taste of what it's like to live this way in the world and be this kind of person. And so certain kinds of virtue, like a kind of courage and confidence that will transfer broadly and deeply, is being created.
So that now that we kind of have the purpose of religion, the usefulness of religion, and kind of like the mode or what religion does in this world, where does it come back to us? And ultimately,
Yep.
where does that aiming toward that which is God, or something that will take the place of God, that's not something that will take the place of God in a bad way, but that will stand in for that
Yeah.
which is God, come back
Yes.
into view?
Excellent. And this is, I think, the proper way of trying to frame what the meaning crisis is, rather than just asking people, do you have friends? Do you have family? Do you have some projects you like? Right? It's that question you just posed. I think that question you just posed is the proper question of the meaning crisis.
Hmm.
And so um, I think, insofar as we are trying to undergo transformative experiences that transform us in ways that ramify through many domains of our life and through many levels of our psyche in a way that makes us more capable of virtuosity and virtue, we're talking about wisdom, the way at least it was meant in the ancient world.
Not
And
just being clever, being able to like have a
no,
very superior pattern recognition device.
no. So wise people, and this is why wisdom is associated with a kind of serious play. Think of the figure of Yoda, and how
Yeah.
there's a lot of serious play around Yoda, but it's serious play. It's not frivolous play, right? Um, or that Jesus compares the people that have to enter the kingdom of God to children. That's the reason why that comparison is being made. So that's a good question. So where do people go? Well, here's another marker of the meaning crisis, how I mean it. The increasing number of people who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
The growing demographics. In fact, you're kind of a bit of a social pariah if you don't sort of say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. See, this is what I mean about an emerging consensus happening below the water lines,
Hmm.
right? Everybody. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, what they mean by that is wisdom's not optional. We are prone to massive amounts of self deception. We need to go through transformative experiences that comprehensively open us up, right, and correct us and refit us to the world and realign the various engines and levels of our psyche, if I can speak that way. So that's not optional. So we still have to do that. So we look for transformative experiences and and an education built around transformative experiences. And
Hmm.
we do these things, and those are our rituals. We don't call them that because goodness knows, Freud, a ritual is something you do only if you're neurotic or superstitious. But
Hmm.
we do all these things, and the problem there is because wisdom's not optional, and because we inevitably face transformative experience, and because we inevitably need something like serious play and ritual to go through it, we have to do these things, but now we're doing them with the leftover, the hangover of the enlightenment, which is I'm the autonomous individual who's doing this. I decide what the sacred is for myself,
Yeah.
by myself, unto myself. And that gets ramified by the fact that we tried secular collectivities like Nazism and communism, and they drenched the world in blood. So we now have this, nope, none of those organized religions. I, right? And so that's basically what spiritual but not religious means. It means the religion of me. That's how
Yeah.
sociologists and anthropologists talk about it.
Yeah.
Spiritual but not religious is the religion of me, right? I'm doing everything that religions do, but it's only about me and I'm the only person doing it. Or I do it with some of my close friends and we're engaging in confirmation pornography. We're only confirming each other's, right? And the problem with that is you lose the ecological capacity of distributed cognition to massively challenge and transform people's biases and prejudices. And
Hmm.
so what you have is you have the spiritual but not religious, which we like, is dovetailing with all the way people go into conspirituality and rabbit holes and dig into their own little world where they feel incredibly meaningful, by the way, but they're doing what I would call part of the meaning crisis, which is they have totally disconnected meaning from wisdom
Hmm.
and transformative experience.
It seems like, to go back to that really provocative phrase that the world is kind of meeting us where we are, or responding to us where we are.
Yeah, partially at least, yes.
The response to the COVID-19 pandemic really woke a lot of people up to the people who they were supposed to trust were not being trustworthy. on a lot of ways. And then that causes a lot of cascade or a lot of these different things. I've been watching for the last 10 years or so, like somebody questions one little assumption and they're like, wait, if I was being lied to about this, I'm being lied to about that and lied to about this. And like, then you're like, well, how based are you allowed to go? Like how many of these assumptions are you allowed to do? And of the questioning of assumptions, there's no end.
Yes.
But like there's a sense that you get around people who are questioning these things, whether they're going towards more panic or more isolation, or they're going towards more calm, cool, collective and collectedness, and that goes back to authority. Maybe that's too quick to put that back into the mix, but we're hungering for leaders who are competent, but we can't trust it. We don't know how to be followers anymore. You see people that get a lot of traction on social media being able to explain something about our moment and criticize and explain the problems of this thing. And then they get a bunch of attention, and then they think that they are somehow a pastor now. But their pastorhood is not connected to human relationship. It's connected to being right. It's connected to being agreed with or disagreed with, right? It's not embodied. It's like the opposite of embodied, and you see them flame out, right? So I'm like asking, like, what do we do?
So first of all, that point you made has been prominent in my thinking and in the way I organize the Vervaeke Foundation around me. I don't know tracking, but we've done a big pivot. I wanted to step away from that trajectory deliberately and explicitly.
From being the Socrates, like yelling at the students and which I love that aesthetically. I love your awakening from the meaning crisis thing.
Yes, but I still aspire to being Socratic, but the point is, and in that way, I think being properly Socratic is not becoming the pastor, like you said. And so, like, there's no more voices with Vervaeke. We've pivoted to the lectern. I don't have followers. I don't have fans. I have students. I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And fewer videos and emphasizing quality and teaching rather than winning. Like, there's been a lot we've done about really pivoting away from that vicious vector that you talked about.
Is it inevitable to do that? I question that. This is a little narcissistic of me, but like I question that. How much do I need to take myself seriously as a content creator without becoming that thing that I don't want to be? But I still have to take myself seriously because it's kind of my job now, So like, how do you do this as like a person in the world?
That's right. That's exactly right. And this goes around the question we keep bumping into. What is John Vervaeke's legitimate authority? Has he properly earned that? And is he properly tethering himself to that legitimate authority? I think I've earned the authority of being a teacher. I'm trying to remember his name. He's a good friend of mine. I'm blanking on it. He wrote A Time Between Two Worlds. Zach Stein, teacherly authority. I hope that I've earned trustworthiness around that role, and I try to resist stepping outside of that role in any fashion. I think I'm still in that role right here, for example.
That's why I explicitly call you professor when we open, because that's how I know how to approach you. And as soon as I approach you that way, the whole world opens up from your perspective. I get to enter into your world.
That's right. I think that's the proper responsibility of my agency in this situation. And so I think you need to ask a similar question. I'm not going to answer it for you because this is a question you have to answer, which is, well, what is exactly the nature of your authority, and which, in good conscience and in discussion with people other than yourself who will tell you the truth because they love you, right?
Yeah.
What authority have you actually earned, and do those two line up, right? And if they line up, then what is your responsibility to that legitimately trustworthy authority? And we did that as at the Vervaeke Foundation. We went through that whole process of answering and trying to address that.
I think that's the key. I think that's the crux of the question that I began with. Authority is tied to responsibility. Like, what is the transcendent principle? I I know the true is really good and beautiful, but people rely so much or lean so much on truth that I see them erring, like going into error. So
And
there's
that's a
something,
mistake around the notion of truth, by the way.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, I mean that's part of the critique of the Enlightenment. So, can we do this right now? Because I think this is important.
yeah.
This is going into the book I'm writing on the cognitive science of religion, right? And there's been some preliminary discussion around this. Jordan Peterson's talked about your aim is true and being true to someone, and so people don't understand that the word true and the word trust have a common etymological origin. It goes back to this notion of troth, like in betrothal, when you're betrothed to someone. And
Or
it's
the
this,
slop bucket that you give to your pigs. No, not that trough.
no, no, troth,
Oh, troth. Okay.
like betrothal.
Okay. Troth. Okay. Thank you.
Um, and so what we had this proposal
Trust.
um, in the Enlightenment that what truth is it's these two things. What I do is I have to get I'm a computer, and what I have to do is I've got to get a logical coherence or consistency of all my propositions, and then that consistent set somehow represents, somehow corresponds to reality, and that's what truth is. And then what happened is almost immediately philosophers started sort of criticizing that and making it more and more problematic. And that criticism gains in a crescendo that sort of peaks with people like Heidegger and Wittgenstein, the two most important philosophers of the 20th century. Very, very quickly, the problem with the coherence model is you can show logically, Reichenbach showed it, for any finite any finite data set, the number of like logically equivalent coherent systems you can impose on that is literally infinite.
Okay.
So the chances, if that's what we're relying on, the chances that you and I have the same coherence is infinitely small.
Okay. Well,
The
could
second,
we try to make the sense of that? What you're making me intuitively think of is those pop psychology books where they pick some number, like 7 stages of something, and they just made up that number, but then they can fit all of the world or their entire argument into this pattern. Is that what you're kind
yeah,
of like you can just take a
yeah, yeah.
pattern and you
Or,
fill
or
it up?
or do this. Here's your scatter plot. Here's your Cartesian graph. Modern science is Cartesian graphing. That's the primary psychotechnology,
Okay.
right? Okay. So here's your graph, and you get all these scatter points. And what were you taught to do in high school? You're taught to draw the line of best fit so you can interpolate and extrapolate, but you're actually ignoring most of the data.
Yeah.
Because what is the number of lines you could actually draw through all of those data points? Now you get it. An
Yeah.
infinite number of lines. And so we make choices based on decisions of relevance and plausibility. And that's where all my other work comes in. And I won't
That
go on about
precedes
that.
truth. So truth or reality is way too complex.
Yes, and this goes towards the collapse of the fact value distinction.
Okay.
And that goes towards the second point, which is, well, there's correspondence. Somehow what's in my head corresponds to what's in the world. It's the same picture or so. And then the problem people have pointed out is, how do you do that? Like you have to somehow stand outside of your head and the world and see that they're matching. And first of all, according to your worldview, there is no such place to stand. And then secondly, how are you knowing your mind and knowing your world except being in direct contact with them? Because if you have to represent them, you then get into an infinite regress that just keeps going. And people realize this doesn't make any sense. This is Wittgenstein's famous thing. We have a picture, and we think because we have a picture, we have a meaning. It's like, what time is it on the sun? And we picture somebody on the sun looking at their watch. But it doesn't make any sense because what time is it is relative to where you are on the earth, right?
Okay. Okay.
And so those two sides collapse, right? The coherence and the correspondence can't be what truth is. Can't be what truth is. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, what is it to be in contact with reality? What is it to have the truth? And now it comes to be something much more different.
Yeah.
And there's an excellent book by Esther Lightcap Meek making use of Polanyi's idea called Contact with Reality. But here's the gist of it. Go back to the stick and the shadow, or the big world and the little world. Truth is that which gives you access to an inexhaustible fount of intelligibility that allows you to retrospectively correct yourself. That's what truth is.
Hmm. There's something very important that you put there. You said correct yourself, not correct the world, not correct other people, but correct yourself first and foremost.
Yes, and but you and but we let's but let me put a caveat in there. When I say correct, I mean do that individually and collectively and dialogically. Yes, yes, and
Okay.
also let the world correct us insofar as we allow it to, disclose itself as something different from our prejudices and our projections. Yes. So the notion that just that notion of contact
Yes.
and reciprocal opening. That's intimate love.
Yeah.
That's love. That's what love is. You want to be in contact with
Yeah.
the person. You want to reciprocally open with them. You want to go through transformation that allows you to see more deeply into them and for them to see more deeply into you. You're making yourself open, and you're also. Do you see? This binds truth and love back together in a way that we separated profoundly from each other at the Enlightenment. And religion was one of the things religion was, at least, some of the versions that I know, right, was the idea that there's a profound connection between loving, knowing, and the truth.
Yeah. Okay. So, how does that? I guess it's just going to instigate itself. Or if people don't follow that path toward correction and all that it entails, because a correction is kind of a breaking.
Yep, yep, yes, it hurts.
Yeah. Without that, we're going to careen in some way. Like it seems like we're always offered the ability to correct ourselves or to enter into that
Yeah.
relationship of correction. You brought up in the conversations with Paul and John about pedagogy, about how do you broadcast this? How do you instigate this? Is there a way to do that? Do you just kind of just throw it out there, and maybe you went
No.
through this with your foundation, like you just
So now we've finally got what I need to answer your question about why not engineer it.
okay,
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's the next big project, the Philosophical Silk Road. The idea here is, see, this is another correction. One of the mistakes I made in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the series, was, that I thought, well, what we can do is top-down engineer the religion that's not a religion, failing to realize that I was doing that the way any good enlightenment person would do. Well, what we need to do is right, we need, right? It's like, oh, right, right, right. And often when you're pointing your finger, that you should always consider pointing it back at yourself.
yeah,
And so, two of the big mistakes of the series was I presented it monologically, which is part of the Enlightenment framing, and I presented it and the answer is an engineering answer, which is
okay,
wrong.
okay.
There's
Were
other things
those
I
were
want.
those mistakes necessary?
I don't know what that means. If you mean,
Were they
could I
part of
have
the ladder of building where you are now?
were they good mistakes? Perhaps that's what you're asking me. Are they mistakes that I'm glad I made? Is it something like that?
No, or were they integral to understand the problem, to work the problem out in that manner?
Oh,
Did
that's
it
an
bring you
interesting.
closer to having mastery over what you were being called to bring to the world?
Whew, thanks, Ben. I want to reflect on that for a second, please. Uh, that's a really, really incisive question. I think I think I couldn't have done otherwise, given where I was at, than make those mistakes. I don't think there was anything insincere about them in that sense. I think that was how I had to show up. And I think doing it in the way I did gave it a kind of reach that allowed me to get to a place where I could properly see the mistakes within it. Sorry, that was a long answer, but you
No,
asked me
no.
how.
It's kind of like the medium is kind of the message. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a part of the message to go through a transit of that type.
Yes, yes. But now what I've come to realize is that we can't engineer the sacred. the analogy I use, but it's actually not quite an analogy because the analogy participates in the phenomena I'm talking about rather than just pointing at it. When you're in one of what I call a dialogos, when you're in a conversation that takes on a life of its own, and both people are reciprocally opening and undergoing transformation, and they're starting to feel like they're getting closer to the really real in a way they only sort of dimly understand, but they're following it as, and they're saying things like, "This is one of the best ways of being a human being." All of that, right? You can't engineer that. You can't engineer that. You can't, like, what you can do, and this is what we're very careful. We have a practice called dialectic in which you can you can engineer teaching people skills and setting up conditions. But that we compare that to like setting the kindling for the fire. That's all you can do. And
Yeah.
it's got to take on a life of its own, or it's not the sacred. It's
Yeah.
not this inexhaustible fount
Yeah.
of intelligibility overwhelming your preconceptions and calling you to radical transformation. And
Yeah.
so the philosophical Silk Road is different. It's different in how I'm coming up to it, and different in in how we're going to try and do it in order to address that profound pedagogical question. And so for me, the philosophical Silk Road is not a project. I call it a pilgrimage because I I have chosen, but it's like a voluntary necessity. It's a calling. I have chosen to commit myself to being as responsible, to being as open and vulnerable to hearing from all of these sages from the Neoplatonic tradition, the Vedantic tradition, and the Zen traditions, three of the great synoptic integrators that weave through multiple religions and philosophies, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to be as open and vulnerable and I'm going to try and listen very deeply so that I can train my ear in a new way and hopefully model through what I undergo as much, if not more than what I say to other people, how we could train our ears to hear the new music of the advent of the sacred so that we can better orient and respond to it.
Is that going to be a solo project, or are you going to be bringing people on?
So I'm going to go all around the world, and there's going to be both people that I'm talking to in an imaginal sense, like maybe Eckhart, or Spinoza, Nicholas of Cusa, but there's also going to be people. I just confirmed with Jonathan Pajot. When I do Maximus the Confessor, we're going to do it in Istanbul, and I'm going to talk to Jonathan Pajot about Maximus the Confessor. And so
Mm.
it's going to be dialogical. We're going to be where Maximus was. We're going to let the geo philosophy, right, the history and the cultural and the milieu and the drama and the narrative, also the music. There's going to be all of that. So there's going to be that upper level where I'm going to travel. I'm going to do the pilgrimage, right? And then there's going to be a level below that. We're hoping we can film it at Ralston, where it's going to be like awakening from the meaning crisis. There's going to be a lecture series
Yeah.
that then builds the argument. And then below that, there's going to be like specific video essays about specific topics, like non-dualism. Here's a non-theism. Here's a deep essay. And then below that, we have a whole bunch of people already working on this, the codex, a whole bunch of volunteers. We're hoping that some of the funding for the Philosophical Soul Road will actually help to, finance some of these people,
Yeah.
compensate them. And what they're doing is they're taking all of the language and they're creating like a Wikipedia glossary of all my terms and cross-referencing diagrams, practices that go with it at multiple levels of accessibility, like a grade 10 level, an adult level, a university, all
Yeah.
the way up to, so it's going to be this four levels. You can move up and down, and you can move along in terms of a narrative. You can move across it in terms of an argument, or you can move across it in terms of topics.
Are there going to be charts?
Hopefully there'll be charts, and there'll be animation, and there'll be pictures, and like and there's a whole bunch of people. This is not sole authorship. Christopher
Okay.
Master Pietro is basically the director of this.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for the content and undergoing and being the vehicle of this, but Christopher is taking charge of like the directing of all of that. Eric Foster is doing all the work around proper promotion and what's the videography. This is very much going to be a collective effort, and what we're trying to do is to give people. I like to say this. The ancient Silk Road gave people a lingua philosophica, like a lingua franca, but it's a lingua philosophica. People didn't all convert to one religion, but they got this language, right, whereby they could enter into these deeply mutually transformative interactions with each other.
Mm.
I want to reopen that and
Yeah.
create a new way in which people can participate in a generation of the lingua philosophica that's like the great vowel shift, that's
Mm.
like that, that
Hmm.
is not engineered but emergent in that way.
What decade are you in of your life?
I just turned 63 on Sunday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're entering that part. I guess you're kind of already been there since I've known you. Of being more the teacher than the pupil. Do you have like somebody above you? Do you have an authority,
Yeah. I mean,
a patron?
uh, I have four. Um, uh, I have four, and then I have something that sort of holds the four together. My four are Socrates and Siddhartha Gautama, Spinoza, because Spinoza is the person who's trying to bring the project of conformity and participation in the sacred within the scientific worldview. He's right there at the time of Descartes doing that, right? And then Shankara from the Vedanta tradition. He's one of the main people who one of the main uh, people who wrote a lot of the philosophy that is understood as Advaita Vedanta. Within that framing, I have a sense of something that sort of became present to me when I participated in the gospel seminars, which was a uh, anyways, it was a renewed relationship to how Jesus of Nazareth can be a sacred presencing of the logos for me without necessarily me becoming a Christian or something like that.
That now
Um,
that's a wordy reply.
yeah, yeah, it is because any kind of Christian I would try to be would immediately be declared a heretic, and I just don't want the hassle. And secondly, I feel as strongly called to these four people that I've mentioned as I have to Jesus of Nazareth. But Jesus points to something that the other four don't. He points to this idea. He points to this idea that being and intelligibility, the ability to generate understanding and knowledge, are somehow one, but they're not logically identical, right? And that there's a relationship of participation between them. And so being
Hmm.
is the Father, the intelligibility is the Logos, and the participation is the Spirit. There's something Trinitarian. And Jesus is the enacted symbol of that. And I've come to appreciate that. And it's involved for me a kind of healing and a rapprochement with my Christian upbringing. I don't consider myself a Christian in that there are many the defining doctrines of Christianity that I would not would not say I believed or even believed in, but those four are held within sort of this Son of Man bottom up and Son of God bottom down
Wow.
kind of thing and that is what I hold myself to. I hold myself to that ultimacy, that sacredness, and then that creates a field, right, within which Siddhartha and Socrates and Spinoza and Shankara are properly placed and they can properly
Hmm.
do a lingua philosophica with each other. That's what I practice every day,
Yeah.
and that is what mentors me.
There is a. I think the last time we spoke at the end, I complimented you on the state that you bring me into when I'm in dialogue with you. You bring me into like this openness. Like I feel you always being open. This time, from the moment we started speaking, there's a lightness to you. There's an openness. There's a broader quality, like kind of a shiny quality to you.
Thank you. I mean, other people have said this, and I tend to look for how other people are seeing me rather than self-describe.
Mm.
Because, I mean, like everybody else, I'm not claiming to be a sage or a saint. I'm egocentric, but I try to give at least special salience to when people do this. And for me, that has served as encouraging evidence that I'm actually doing what I'm saying I'm doing. I'm orienting towards making myself open and vulnerable. Look, I'm really open to where I'm going to end up at
Yeah.
the end of this pilgrimage.
Well, it's
I
not a
might.
Silk Road to nowhere.
That's right. That's
We know
right.
that.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And people travel on the Silk Road and stay where they traveled to, or they traveled on the Silk Road and then they come back and transform the world that they left. I'm all of that is good. I'm open to all of that. Um,
Hmm.
I've committed myself to every one of these thinkers, even if I've studied them deeply before. I'm going to try and see something new that's challenging and transformative in me of them, for each and every one of them. I'm trying to hear them again for the first time.
Hmm.
Now, I'm going to do the benefit of having done a lot of scholarship, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's going to be that Paul Ricoeur talked about second naivete. You have your initial naivete, but it's fraught with all the proclivities of self-deception. You go through an education, and then you can recover a second naivete that is a wiser kind of naivete. I aspire to bring that to bear as my proper orientation to walking the philosophical Silk Road.
Professor, thank you very much for your time. Your publicists were supposed to send me your book, but it never got here, so I wasn't able to
There's the book right there. Here it is.
furnish it for it, but here it is. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Book one, of course, because we're
Yeah.
talking to John Vervaeke. And that's available anywhere? Is this like a
It's on
university
Amazon. You
imprint?
can
Okay,
order it right away. You
great.
can order it right away. You'll have it in a couple days.
And does that like fit right into your video series, or is this like the outcome of
No,
it?
no. It's so the thing to think about. This is not just a transcription of the video series.
Yeah.
First of all, notice the number of authors. There's a second author,
Up
Christopher
top.
Massapietro, and there's a
Yeah.
third person, Madeline Abramian.
Okay.
Right? This was done dialogically, not monologically. And Christopher's voice, his lyricism, his ability to make material more accessible is there. It is different. It is better. Is all the citations are there. There's diagrams and
Yep.
figures, right? It is not simply a companion or a transcription. It is its own thing
Yeah.
above and beyond. Very much.
I really can't state how strongly I can't suggest strongly enough your series and that book will fold into your series for people who want foundations for where we are,
Yeah.
deep historical conversations that have been going on. We see so little of where we are because we forget. We think the world's speaking to us, but the world's been speaking to itself, speaking to itself, speaking to itself. And you do a very great job of kind of
Thank you.
walking us through. It's another pilgrimage up
Yes.
to now. And it's great. Every episode, like when I was listening to your series, I get expanded a little bit more. So you always have like within that teaching, there's a transformative nature to that monologue that you're doing because of the way that you set it up. So it's a great exercise and then also great edification.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. I do hope that people consider getting the book. I think the book, especially Christopher's voice, is very important, and he brings in that dialogical component I've been talking about.
Wait, did you guys do an audiobook too? So
No,
go-
we're talking about it, and we're wondering if we can do the audiobook because the YouTube series is there, and it's
Yeah.
also on podcast, and
Yeah.
we don't know if Audible will track for people. And we've been told that there's something less daunting about this than looking at a 50-hour video series,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that's the case as well.
Yeah. When I was looking you up right before this conversation, Google calls you a YouTuber. It's like John
Yeah.
Vervaeke, YouTuber. It's like the understatement of a lifetime, man.
Yeah, I know. That's really an odd thing. One of the things that happened as a result of awakening from the meaning crisis is the number of professional academic connections and collaborations I have has skyrocketed. So it didn't take me away from my
Yeah.
philosophical and scientific pursuits. It enriched them.
Yeah. Yeah. But from the outside looking in, you're just a YouTuber. So a lowly
Just
content creator, just like a humble influencer.
oh God.
John, I'm going to link to your work down in the description. Thank you very much for your day. This is just a wonderful conversation.
I always enjoy talking with you, Ben. And well, whenever you want me back, I'm happy to come back.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have to plug your next series when it's ready. I'm going to end the recording.
I'll count on it. I'll come back and talk about it.